NBC's Priscilla Thompson is on the scene for us in Kerrville, Texas. Also with us, Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason and former senior FEMA official in the Obama administration, Lars Anderson. Welcome to all of you. Priscilla, with recovery operations ongoing now ahead of the president's visit, where do things stand and what will we see from the president?
Yeah, Alex, still more than 160 people in this county alone still missing. And so the focus today remains on that search effort. At daybreak today, we saw task force going out in boats, beginning that effort again today. And that is undoubtedly something that the president will likely see and hear about a lot today as he arrives around midday. He's expected to meet with first responders and officials, so he will get a briefing on those efforts. And then he will likely also hear of some of those heroic stories of first responders who 1 week ago today were out as these floods were rushing in, trying to save as many people as they could. And he's also expected to meet with the families of these victims, families who have lost loved ones, families who are still waiting for word of loved ones. And of course, all of this comes as this effort does appear to be becoming less of a rescue effort and much more of a recovery effort, with the urgency growing with each passing hour, just for any sort of closure for so many of these families who are still missing loved ones at this point.
So thank you for that. Let's move to you now, Jeff. We have Trump's visits to disaster areas. I mean, look, they're often shaped by the political makeup of that area. You'll recall before visiting wildfire-ravaged Los Angeles earlier this year, he heaps blame on California's leaders, and he threatened to withhold federal aid. It is a stark contrast to this rhetoric about the Texas flood. This is Texas. So what are you watching for when he visits?
Yeah, I think you're right to highlight that, Alex. Look, it is a typical job for any president of the United States to go and visit disaster areas after big storms and other natural disasters. President Trump is no different in that he is doing that and doing it today with First Lady Melania Trump. What is different is exactly what you just said. There's politics involved in every bit of presidential travel, but President Trump highlights and elevates that by directing criticism at Democratic states like California when he went there ahead of his visit or during the visit, and that is not what he's doing when he's going to Texas. Texas, of course, is a red state. The area where the storm happened was especially supportive of President Trump in the 2024 election. So I think you'll see and hear nothing but praise. I think you also will not hear him responding in a way that shows any sort of second guessing about the federal response. The other piece, though, that I'm looking for, Alex, to your question is whether or not he shows a little more of an indication on what his plans are for FEMA. The president has said he wants to get rid of FEMA and do so by the end of this year, but he's been hedging a little bit lately and not responding to that question when we've asked him at the White House or when he's traveling. That is a pretty relevant thing right now, given the importance of FEMA in responding to this disaster and many others. So I'll be watching to see if he shows any more indication of what he plans to do with that.
Yeah, we'll be watching that as well. And I ask you, Lars, a bit about that because, yes, he wants to get rid of it or at minimum reduce the profile and the budget for FEMA. Based on what you're learning about the operations in Texas, is FEMA doing anything differently in this response?
No, I mean, I think FEMA's doing what it always does is, show up and try and help when they can. I think what's really important and what's really interesting to note, though, is Texas is probably one of those states that is most prepared for the disasters. It's one of the states that's well-funded. They have a good emergency manager on the ground, and yet they still need this federal response. They need millions, probably billions of dollars of help from the federal government. So if you take a state like Texas, which is ready to deal with these types of disasters, and you look at smaller states that don't have the capacity, it really shows the importance of FEMA and what FEMA does and the whole federal response.
Lars, here's a new Homeland Security policy. It requires Secretary Noem to sign off on any agency spending that exceeds $100,000. Yeah. NBC News' Kristen Welker asked the president about reports that this may have delayed the federal response in Texas. And he said, quote, "I don't know anything about it. We were right on time. We were there. In fact, she was the first one I saw on television." But could that Noem $100,000 policy, could it slow things down during a critical response like this?
I do think it can. You've seen reports where the search and rescue teams took longer than they normally would to get to Texas. I don't know if that would have made that much of a difference in terms of finding people, but I think it's important to give emergency managers the ability to kind of make decisions on their own or pre-deploy. That's what, after post-Katrina, those are some of the reforms that were put in place to allow emergency managers to put assets in place and really get teams off the ground. You never want to be late in a response like this. And so I think there'll be some lessons learned from this tragedy, and hopefully they'll make some changes moving forward.
Well, let's talk about that, Priscilla, because we have also learned in 2024, the Kerr County officials specifically warned a flood event was likely in the next year. Can you tell us more about that and whether any action was taken?
Yeah, Alex, and we know that they also talked about flood warning systems, but they actually decided to defer that conversation and any action on that until the plan was updated. And sadly, these floodwaters rushed in before there was an opportunity to do that. And that is despite that 2024 mitigation plan saying, quote, every jurisdiction can expect to experience some type of flooding that may or may not meet the definition of a 100-year or 500-year event on a more regular basis. The local planning team determined it is likely that Kerr County and the participating jurisdictions will experience a flood event in the next year. And so definitely questions around this. We know that the Texas legislature is going into a special session later this month, and hearings are going to be held on the entirety of the response here. And we know that at least one of those hearings is going to happen right here in Kerrville because legislators want to hear directly from the people impacted, hear their frustrations, and begin to better understand what went wrong and how they can ensure that something like this doesn't happen again.
Lars, what kind of prevention measures could be implemented in, say, a 12-month time frame or less that could have really helped this situation?
I mean, I think when you have situations like this, warning people about the potentials of the dangers is really critical. So that's not only the potential of these alarms that they're talking about, but really a robust text message program. A couple of days ago here in D.C., we had a major storm, and I got an alert on my phone saying, tornado warning. I think it's really important to have those types of things in place so that you get the most information out to people as soon as you can.
Yet, would that also include not extending the footprint of a camp into a floodplain, as has been alleged was done with Camp Mystic?
I don't know the details on exactly where Camp Mystic was located within the flood zone, but I think it's something people need to look at. I read in reports that they had an emergency plan approved a couple days before this tragedy occurred.
They did.
And so, it makes me wonder I think people really need to take a look at where these camps are located, where these facilities are located, and really take the flooding seriously. People don't think about flooding as dangerous sometimes, but it's a huge problem.
They will now. Yeah, they will now. Jeff, I want to ask you a question, but let everyone know what we're seeing there. There is Marine One. It has landed there at Joint Base Andrews, where the president will take off and head down to Texas shortly. He's waved off questions, Jeff, about FEMA's future, particularly while this Texas response has been playing out. But then just Wednesday, Secretary Noem said this about FEMA. Take a listen.
It has been slow to respond. At the federal level, it's even been slower to get the resources to Americans in crisis. And that is why this entire agency needs to be eliminated as it exists today and remade into a responsive agency.
And you made the point earlier that he has vowed to get rid of FEMA, but we know that he tends to change course on a dime, right? Do you think today's visit could change his thinking? I'm curious if you're hearing anything about that inside the White House.
He absolutely changes his thinking on a dime. And what was instructive to me from those comments from Secretary Noem that you just played is that she used the talking point of saying it needs to be eliminated, but she added in the way that it is now. That leaves quite a bit of potential wiggle room for keeping FEMA, revamping FEMA, doing something to FEMA that the Trump administration can paint as having been a change or a shift or a major restructuring that doesn't entirely close it or doesn't entirely get rid of it. I can't tell you whether that's what they're going to do, but I do think it's instructive that she altered her language in that way. As far as Trump is concerned, the president is concerned, look, this will be his decision. And he does react to human activities. And I think it'll be hard not to see what he sees today and not give it some extra thought.